Hello, this is Vasu or Lisa again. This is my 7th video. I decided to do 7 videos and this is number 7. And this video is on my personal relationship with Ram Dass over 44 years. I wasn't going to use notes, but because there's so much to say and there's so much I don't want to forget to say, I actually made some notes. And so I have them here. And my personal relationship with Ram Dass was both joyous and loving, challenging and fierce. He had an infectious sense of humor. An infectious sense of humor, which will be showed in some. He was a real jokester, and I have some great shots of him being that jokester. And he was a wonderful storyteller, and of course for me a wonderful, wonderful teacher, an exquisite teacher. And he loved listening to the news. He loved to sit down in front of the TV and watch the news, and he loved his tea whenever, morning, noon, or night. And I always enjoyed that part of him, that humanness, that let's sit down on the couch and watch the news. I first encountered Ram Dass by reading Be Here Now in September of 1974, as I've said in one of the other videos. And I first saw him person to person was in May of 1975 when he spoke at Sergeant's Gym on Comm Ave in Boston at Boston University. And that was the first time that I got to see him. And the entire scene was kind of strange for me. Everybody was, like I said, I felt like an LL Bean girl, and everybody looked like they were from Woodstock or the Summer of Love. However, there was something that drew me to this person, this Ram Dass. There was a lot of people on the stage. I remember Krishna Das was one of them, but I just loved it. And then my very first meeting with Ram Dass was in late April, early May. Now let's see, if I saw him in Boston in May, and then the end of May is when I had my personal interview with him, well, small group interview at the Hanuman Foundation in New York City. And once I started classes with him, he asked me when I had a one-on-one interview with him what I wanted to do, and I told him I wanted to move to New York. So sure enough, in August of 1975, I moved to New York, to Queens, New York, to one of the houses, because there was a large scene around Ram Dass. It was the time of the teachings of Ram Dass, Joya, and Hilda. And they were gathering people, and people were living in communal houses, and I was living in a Ram Dass house in Rego Park, which was called Queens 5. And I remember Gangadhar, or Mark Gerhard, and he talks about he's in the process of writing a book, and one of the books would be, the title would be, We'd Believe Anything. And during that whole year that we were all going to classes every single day, many, many things happened, some quite miraculous and some a little bizarre. But that was the times. Well, I loved being around Ram Dass, and I can remember asking Anjani, who was his personal assistant and secretary of the Hanuman Foundation, I one day asked her, could I come and do volunteer work at the foundation on 276 Riverside Drive? And she said, sure. I felt like the little French bichon frisé. Anything that Ram Dass wanted, I was like, I just adored him. I adored being around him. He seemed to be everything to me, like somebody I'd never met before. And I can remember during the time I was volunteering at the foundation, I would get to know him better and better. And he used to drive to Boston, to Cambridge, to teach at Mary McClellan's house, and the McClellans, who actually David McClellan was his boss at Harvard, who eventually had to fire him Well, eventually Ram Dass started having classes at his house on Washington Street in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And at that time, the McClellans were Quakers, so they always had a lot of people around and they had gatherings at their house. And so Ram Dass maybe every 6 weeks would drive to Boston and teach a class there. And whenever he would go, I would ask him if I could come and have a ride. And then I could go to Gloucester to visit my family. And he always let me come, and I would be in the car with him thinking, wow, I'm with Ram Dass. And but as my time continued in my volunteer role at the foundation, he would ask me to cut his hair, and to this day I still have an envelope filled with the hair I cut from him one night when he asked me for a haircut. And it's an envelope full. I guess we could clone Ram Dass. Well, in April of 1976, he was getting ready for a big retreat that early summer. And Anjani, who was his secretary at the time, left for various personal reasons. So he came to me one day in April of 76 and said, Liisa, do you think you could organize this retreat for me? You'd have to find a place for 350 people. It will be the first death and dying retreat. And I was so thrilled that he asked me. I said, of course. And with the help of somebody, Dwarkanath Bonner, or Dwarka Bonner, we found the Roger Williams College in Bristol, Rhode Island. And in June of 1976, Ram Dass had the first Death and Dying retreat, which Elizabeth Kubler-Ross attended. And Stephen Levine, who was the editor at Unity Press and did in Santa Cruz, California, and actually, published a lot of Ram Dass's books, Ram Dass invited him to come and teach meditation. And I remember the three of us driving up to Ram Dass's father's place, and the stories Ram Dass told. Well, I can't get into them here. But anyway, because of that retreat, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross asked Stephen if he would teach meditation at her retreats. And it became a whole career for Stephen, because he started teaching retreats and working with people that were dying. And he was a phenomenal teacher, and he's written phenomenal books. And he and Andrea went on to teach many, many retreats and workshops over the years. And Stephen died a few years ago. And again, any of this work that you might want to know about, you can find it on the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation or ramdass.org. Because of that Roger Williams College retreat and Ram Dass trusting me, in my career, I actually went on to host many workshops, many retreats, many conferences, and eventually I was the conference service director at a big seminary, a theological seminary in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area, which was a 72-bed conference center. And, we had all kinds of workshops and lectures and ongoing retreats. So I have to say, because of Ram Dass, I really had a career all my life because of him. I remember one day he was going away. He was going to be away for, I don't know, I think on a 6-week or 8-week tour. And I don't know where I got the guts or the chutzpah, but I said, Ram Dass, since you're going away, could I use your car? And then I could go to visit my family in Massachusetts. And I remember him being kind of startled. I mean, when you think about it, I was 23 years old. And I remember him closing his eyes for a long time. And then he looked at me very quizzically and he goes, yeah, I guess you can use my car. So that began an ongoing, whenever he went away, he'd always say to me, Liisa or Vasu, do you need a car? And I was lucky to be able to use his Bel Air, his Chevy Bel Air that was brand new, and on the back it had bells strung so that when you stopped, the bells would ring. And then that summer, he decided to pick up his old '66 Jaguar from New Hampshire, from Franklin, the farm, and he asked me if I wanted to use that for the whole summer. So I had it had two gas tanks in the '66 Jaguar, and I got to use it all summer. But I always felt so special because it was Ram Dass's car. And then as time went on, he bought a red Dodge van, and he would go away, and it was a camper van. It was set up, you could sleep in it and cook in it, and it was a maroon red color. And he would say, "Do you want to use the van?" And so I got to use the van several times, and it was always really special because it was set up so beautifully. And again, I felt very special. One thing I never did get to drive was Ram Dass had an orange MG, which he kept auctioning off during the bandaras at the temple to raise money for the temple. But many a times it was given back so it could be auctioned off again. But I never did drive the MG, but I will post a picture of him in the MG when he came up to our house in Fairfax to pick up Soma Krishna, who was a dear old friend of his. So I'm going to tell you a story about Ram Dass when I really saw his fierceness. He was away, and at that time, you could kind of finagle things and get information. And he was away on his speaking tour, and he'd been away maybe 6 weeks. And I called the airlines. I said, "Hi, this is Richard Alpert's secretary, and I need to pick him up at the airport, and he doesn't know that I'm coming, and this is really very important." And I kept persuading this woman on the other line, this reservationist, would she please give me his information? And lo and behold, she did. So I was so happy. I drove out in Ram Dass's Bel Air, and I parked the car at LaGuardia at that time, and I went to pick him up, and he was so surprised and happy, and we took all his bags. We went out to the parking lot. I couldn't remember where I parked the car. And this is a huge parking lot. I was so excited about picking him up that I found a spot, parked the car, and then I didn't remember where I parked it. And Ram Dass was furious. He had just been traveling a long time, and he's very happy and very nice to see me, but then I can't find the car. And we walked around the airport parking lot for at least 45 minutes. We finally found the car, and once again, he didn't talk to me. I said, "Well, I'll drive. He goes, "Okay." We drove into New York City, and he said, "I want to park in this particular parking lot." And we went in, and I had sunglasses on. Well, once we went underground, I couldn't see. And I flipped the sunglasses off. I almost crashed into the barrier where you pick up your ticket. And then we went in, and we were walking up, and I think we were near Times Square, and it was extremely busy, and it was a really warm day. And Ram Dass crossed the street and left me on the other side because I had his heavy bag. And I remember thinking, oh my God, he was not very nice. He was really annoyed with me. So that was one particular aspect where I really felt his fierceness. And then he kind of gave me heck, saying, you have to be aware of what you do and where you park your car and how you go about it. And, I was just completely so enamored by him that I completely clouded over. So I did learn to make sure you're in your feet, make sure you're in your body, make sure you know what you're doing, one step at a time. And that was one of his fierce teachings, but also I surely didn't forget it. Then I heard he was going to go to India, and this was in late August, and I said, I've got to go to India. And so there was someone else in the class, because after that full year, the classes were ending. and I decided I would go to India. So I flew to India with another friend in the class, and we arrived in India in late August, and it was so hot. I had never experienced that in my life. And we went to this hotel on Connaught Place, or Connaught Circle in Delhi, and it was called the Palace Heights. Well, I was so new to India. There was a spigot and water pouring out of it in this dark, dingy, cement-like bathroom, and there was just boards with little pads on them for beds and nothing else. Thank God I had a sleeping bag. And I remember I couldn't sleep at all, and early in the morning I started hearing bells and noises and chants, and I went outside and I looked, and what did I see but two ox pulling, or cows, or bulls pulling this wooden, I don't know what you want to call it, but cart. And I was like, wow, we're not in Kansas anymore. Anyway, things went on, and I did team up with Ram Dass a little bit in Nainital and in Kenchi. I didn't have a lot of contact with him, but I did see him in India. It wasn't until a second trip that a lot more happened. But I did get to meet the Shah family and beloved KK, who passed not long after Ram Dass. And they were Guru brothers to the very, very, very end. And so India was an awakening, a big awakening. And I did a lot of traveling. And then at the first Bandara, I met my dear friends for life, Martin Worth and Annie Worth, although they're not a couple anymore, but I met them at the Hanuman temple in Vrindavan at one of the Bandaras, at a Mahasamadhi Bandara. And so my India travels that time lasted for 6 months. And I did wind up going to the Kumbh Mela in 1977. And in January, on the banks of the Kumbh Mela, on the banks of the Ganga, in a little kuti, Siddhi Ma was going to give me a name, and there was all these people crowded in this little room, and I was with KK, and I was like, oh, I don't want one of the regular names, I want a different name. And there's a big, beautiful picture of Maharaji. And she looked up at the picture, and she looked at me, and she looked at Maharaji's picture, and she looked at me, and she said, Maharaji names you Vasudha. And I remember KK sitting next to me, oh, Vasudha, that's such a beautiful name. And eventually one of his nieces was called Vasudhara. Anyway, that's just a quick India story. And going back to my notes, because I didn't want to forget anything. I got back from India in February of 77, and then in June of 77, my dear friend Meenakshi and Dwarka, at the time were having a baby, Ramachandra, and I hitchhiked with this woman named Saraswati to New York to see the birth of Ramachandra, and Ram Dass was also there. And then in August of that year, everybody decided to move to Boulder, Colorado, and I asked if I could go with them, and sure enough, we moved to 809 11th Street in Boulder, Colorado. There was a small office, which was the Hanuman Foundation office that Dwarka ran, and that also there was a small bedroom there that was Ram Dass's bedroom when he occasionally came to visit. And it was a large communal house with many people, and we all lived there for about a year. And Danny Goleman, or Jagannath, decided that he wasn't going to keep the house because he had rented it from somebody, but he called Trungpa Rinpoche up and asked Trungpa if he would like to rent that house. And sure enough, Trungpa did buy the house, actually, from us. And there's another cute story that goes with that, but that's for another time. Another time I felt Ram Dass's fierceness was I was living in Boulder, and he was on a nationwide lecture tour, and he called me and he said, Vasu, how about setting me up in a lecture there? So I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder, and set all the lecture up for the big auditorium, which had, I think occupancy was 3,000. And that was in, I think, the spring of 78. And I set it all up. In the night of the lecture, it was pouring out. I mean, pouring. And there were a line. It sold out. There was a line all the way around the auditorium. And Ram Dass came up to me and goes, Vasu, get those doors open. Let everybody in. They're getting soaked. So I went to the custodian there and he said, I'm sorry, it's rules. You're not allowed to open the doors until a particular time. And I went and told Ram Dass. He goes, I won't have it. Open those doors. So I remember going and opening the doors, and the place, of course, it was a sellout. And Ram Dass and I were looking, and everybody, it was completely full. And I said, oh my gosh, Ram Dass, it's unbelievable. It's like the opening of a ballet. And he laid into me, telling me that I was making him really nervous, and other things were said. And oh man, I was a puppy with its tail between her legs. Anyway, we all went back to the 809 11th Street to sleep that night. And I remember I couldn't sleep and I just felt really rotten. But I thought, why is he being so mean to me? And in the morning, there's a little knock on the door. Vasu, it's Ram Dass. Can I come in? And he came in and he said, will you forgive me for being so mean? I was nervous and I blamed it all on you. And so he had that willingness to admit when he might have been a little bit off. And he could be off. And when he was off, he could be real off, like I guess all of us are. Anyway, I'm going to move forward. Here we are in Boulder, Colorado. And in September, it was 1978, Hanuman, the Murti, the statue, arrived at Vishu and Kaushalia's house up in the mountains of Arroyo Seco. And Hanuman was in a crate, and the crate was opened, and the first Bandara happened, or the big Mahasamadhi Bandara, and it was grand. And again, I have some pictures from that time, and that will also be posted so you can get a really good idea. And after that Bandara, I went back to Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I went on a year-long trip. And I left in December 78, and I didn't come back till November of 79, and I landed in India in September of 79, and I knew Ram Dass was coming. And Ram Dass and 6 others, we went on a pilgrimage to 2 holy places, Badrinath and Kedarnath. And again, Ram Dass is trickster. On our way, we had to sleep in a place called Rudraprayag. And all we had was this horrible little cow shed. And we were all sleeping on the dirt in our sleeping bags. And you could feel things run over the sleeping bags. And oh, it was horrible. And I remember Ram Dass was sleeping so well. And in the morning I said, Ram Dass, how could you sleep? I couldn't sleep a wink. I could hear the little rats and stuff running over us. Ram Dass said, I took a Valium. And I thought, oh, wow, right. He just conked right out. I was petrified. The next morning we all got in the bus on our way to Badrinath. And we stopped in the hill station. These are really windy roads to get to these places. And the bus rides were like, we would all hold on and pretend we were on spaceships with our eyes closed because it was so spectacular but so scary at the same time. And we stopped in one place, and I got out to go to the bathroom. And then I see the bus moving, and I see Ram Dass waving to me from the bus window. And I'm like, oh my God, what's happening? I'm going to miss the bus. Well, he knew that the bus was going to stop 100 yards down this horrible little road. And he got the biggest kick out of that, laughing and laughing and laughing. I didn't think it was very funny anyway. But it was a great trip. And then we went to Kedarnath, and when we got to Kedarnath, we hiked, I don't know how many hours, because I remember it was almost dark when we made it to the temple in Kedarnath. But again, to be with Ram Dass like that in such an intimate way. I do have some pictures from that time, but they're not that great, so I don't know if I will post them. But still, I honored him, but at the same time, he was very human and he was very loving, and I don't remember ever paying for anything on that trip. I think he picked up the cost of the bus tickets and the train tickets, and he paid for meals, and he was so well. I always remember him being so generous with me. Whenever I needed help, he would give me some little jobs and pay me. Once we got back to the States, I actually moved to California in 1980. I moved to California, and I actually moved into, first we all moved to, in 79, yes, I moved to California. Ram Dass was already living in California, and he moved out of his house on Main Street in SoCal, and I actually moved into his house and lived there for a short time, and then in the summer of 80, I moved to New Mexico. I actually went to acupuncture school here, but after acupuncture school was over, I moved back to California. But during that time, Ram Dass also came and rented a house in Santa Fe, and the first dying center was run by Dale Borglum, was in Sunlit Hills in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I lived there for a year, and Ram Dass would visit, as well as Stephen and Andrea, and it was really the beginning of more of that, the Hanuman Foundation Dying Center that actually now is the Living Dying Project. And after the time in Santa Fe, I moved back to California in the end of 82. Ram Dass eventually moved also to California, to San Anselmo. And but during that time, after moving to, I think it was in the summer, or right before I moved to California, or after I moved to California, Ram Dass had moved to Massachusetts to take care of his father, who was ill in Cohasset, Massachusetts. And I went down a couple times to visit him there. And I remember him telling me about two women, Marlene and Joanne, who eventually, they all moved to California, and Marlene and Joanne became Ram Dass's helpers, and big helpers, because after Ram Dass had his stroke, they were really there for him. And they're still alive today. They're wonderful women, and they would set up little events for Ram Dass. They would have dinners at their house and gatherings, and it was always really fun. And then what I didn't mention is also Ram Dass would come to any birthday parties that I had. And I remember one time going to this Savannah Grill in Corte Madera, and Ed was having a small birthday dinner for me. And I said, "Oh my God, Ed, Ram Dass is sitting at the bar. Don't say anything, just keep walking." And I walk in, and Ram Dass goes, "Happy birthday, surprise!" And he had some kind of flower in his hand, and that was sweet. And he did that more than once. And we had a big party for Ed, and he came and he took the microphone and he got on his knees and he told a story about, when I was going to marry Ed, and how I asked him about it. And again, really sweet, touching, personal stories. I passed everything through Ram Dass, and Ram Dass was so sweet because he always took the time. I have to say, now I was the one that I always called Ram Dass up. I never missed a birthday card in 44 years. I wrote to him any way I could be in contact with him. However, he always called back. He always wrote back. And I asked him to do many, many things for me. Retreats or whatever nonprofit I was working for. If I needed to do a fundraiser, I would call Ramdas and I would ask him, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? And he always said yes. And something I should say about how generous Ramdas was, I would always say, Ramdas, I'll pay for your flight, your hotel, your food. He would always say, Vasu, let's just split whatever the door is. I'll take care of my flights. I'll take care of my food and other arrangements. During the retreat or during the day long, you can take care of it. And so in that way, he always made it very, very, very simple. And I so appreciated that. Even there were times when I was very upset and he would call me up and I'd say, Ramdas, I don't have a job. What am I going to do? And I remember he suggested this job on the East Coast, which I did go to, and it turned out to be really not good. And he said, what's going on? I said, well, Ramdas, it's not working. He goes, pack your bags and come back to California. I remember that very well. I told him, Ramdas, that was the most expensive workshop I ever did. Moving everything to Massachusetts for like 3 months and then moving back to California. But California is where I met my husband, Edward, creator of the BZone.com. Anyway, to move on and telling more stories about Ramdas, when Ramdas had his stroke in the fall of 1997, that was a big shock for so many of us. And I think it was a big shock for Ramdas too. However, after he started getting well, I sent him a check and I said, Ramdas, you do what you need with this check because of how much he's done for everybody. And I remember him writing me back, because I had gone to a yoga teacher training, and him writing me back and sending me half of what I had sent him, saying, you need this for your new career. And so there's another example of how extremely generous he was, and most of the time he thought of other people and how he could make other people's lives better. And I really feel that Maharaji's teaching, love, serve, remember everyone, he was the epitome of love, serve, remember everyone. I'm just making sure I don't forget anything. And then after his stroke, he had a really rough time psychologically and emotionally, and he had some wonderful things lined up to do before his stroke, and they weren't going to happen after the stroke. And he was having a real rough time. It was a really dark night of the soul for him. And he eventually moved to Maui. There were many caregivers that just weren't making it. And I was so happy when finally Rameshwar Das and Raghu Mirabai Bush really took over to take care of him. And because it was so needed. You know, Ramdas took a trip to Brazil where he met João de Deus, and he had a very awakening experience there where he felt like he had found Maharaji again and his heart opened, and from them he did get better and better. There are many stories that could be told, but it just becomes more of the gossip mill, so I just don't want to tell any of them. But I did stay very close with Ramdas, even during his stroke, even during the hard times. I would always call and check in. And however, when he did move to Hawaii, over the, I think, 19 years that he was there, I would try to go to visit him as much as I could. He had 2 different houses in the same area in Haiku, which both had the most magnificent views of the ocean. But the second house had an ohana, and he would do personal retreats with people. Although the doors were always open, there was an unending group of people that wanted to visit him. And people know about his weekly swims and everybody going. And he would always take a lot of us to lunch afterwards, which is very special. And I went to his house for special meals, and he took me out for special meals. But my most favorite times with him was when we would go upstairs alone to his room, or we would be alone in his living room that had the most exquisite vista, the most exquisite view of the ocean and the sky. And there were times when Ram Dass would share with me about his prep school days, about his relationship with his father, and the New Haven Railroad and the job, and how he would travel from Stanford and from San Francisco back to New York and back for his dad. And then lo and behold, Ram Dass told me about the discovery that he had a son from a sweet fling while he was a student at Stanford. And that family, Ram Dass's son and his family, brought a whole new aspect to Ram Dass's life. And when he told me the story, I remember he showed me a picture of Peter. And I looked at the picture and I said, Ram Dass, what are you doing at a Catholic christening? And he said, that's my son. Vasu, that's my son. And I looked at the picture and I looked around and I said, Ram Dass, he looks just like you. And the delight that was in his eyes, I found it precious, precious, precious. But then what I noticed over the years, when I would go to visit him in Maui, I noticed him getting lighter in weight, and his eyes were getting lighter, and he was softer, and finding words was becoming more and more difficult. But what I found was, man, that love light was shining from him, and I felt it very much so, and I loved coming to visit, although I didn't get to visit lots and lots of times. But I can remember being there and saying, Ram Dass, he had been taped for the Oprah show, for Super Soul Sunday, and Oprah came to his house. Well, I just happened to be in Maui when they were going to air it on TV. And I said, Ram Dass, I really want to come to see this. And he said, yes, come. But it was going to be aired at 6 o'clock in the morning, this particular Sunday morning. And I got up, and the day before I went and bought his favorite Boston cream pie, although, he wasn't supposed to have very many sweets, but he loved to eat, and he loved sweets. And I made chai, and sure enough, we watched the show, and it was just so touching to share Super Soul Sunday, Oprah and Ram Dass. And I had always been an Oprah fan, so it was a delight. And Ram Dass was like, what do you think? How did I do? And one time, I'm going to go back and tell another story. When we lived in Boulder, Colorado, we were going through a lot of his old things that happened to just be in trunks downstairs. And I can remember he had all his parents' Fiesta wear from the New Hampshire house, and he had beautiful quilts. And then there was some Life magazines, and he said, oh my gosh, Vasu, look at this Life magazine. Do you remember this? And I looked at it, I said, Ram Dass, it's 1963. I said, I was only 11 years old. So there you see the span of time that occurred with Ram Dass, but that he would share even his days of youth. And I was always delighted by it because I felt really a part of his life when he would share that. Because I felt that, it was precious, precious, precious. Well, I'm getting near the end, and I want to give a special thanks. And it's funny because I had a dream about her last night, Dasima, who came into Ram Dass's life probably 10 years before he passed and became his caregiver, his friend, his confidant, his partner in all things. And she was the one that would capture pictures for everyone, personal pictures and group pictures. And to this day, I have a series of pictures she took with Ram Dass and I. And to this day, I cherish those pictures. And one of them is here. I'm not sure if the camera can pick it up because of the light and glare, but she was the one that really took care of Ram Dass. And so a big shout out to her. And last night, which I think is interesting, that I had this dream of her, and Ram Dass was there too. And we were in this big room, and we were on another plane of consciousness, or another local of a level, and everyone said, let's just drop our bodies and just jump. And we all did, and we jumped, and it was in beautiful light. And I remember saying, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. And I did speak that out loud last night. And Ed said, what? And I realized I was in a dream, and I was sharing, we were floating and swimming in light. And I thought how appropriate that, because I had chosen today to finish my 7 video homage to Ram Dass. And Rameshwar Das is in the process of putting a book together that are people's interviewing. He's interviewed many people to let them share their stories of Ram Dass, and that will be coming out, I'm not sure. And the last story before I close is, one day in a Joya class back in New York, actually it was in Brooklyn, we were all sitting, there had to be 100 people in the room, and all of a sudden Joya called my name and she said, stand up. And I stood up, and she said, who's your guru? And I said, Ram Dass. And Ram Dass is shaking his head like this. Ram Dass is sitting there, Joya is sitting there, and Hilda's sitting there, and he's shaking his head, and Joya starts laughing. She said, who's your guru? Guru. I said, Ram Dass. And Ram Dass is looking at me like this. So what I want to say about that is, I feel like I'm the first generation after the passing of Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji, the embodiment, the guru of gurus. But Ram Dass was my superhero. He was the one that showed me the map, and the map that I was able to follow, because I was young, I was naive, I didn't know, I believed everything he said. I didn't even think for myself. As Gangadhar said, we would believe anything. But I really feel that Ram Dass embodied Maharaji's teachings. He was the Pied Piper, and he shared those teachings with everyone, and he hardly ever charged any money. And Ram Dass carried this love with him. His teaching was simple: love, serve, remember. And that was Maharaji's gift to all of us. And in closing, I want to share from Parvati Marcus's book, Love Everyone, which I highly recommend you go out and buy or get it on Amazon. Love Everyone. At the very end of the book, there's a beautiful quote that's from an Irish headstone. And in closing, I want to say, death leaves a heartache no one can heal. Love leaves a memory no one can steal. Shri 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 Ekazaram Baba Neem Karoli Santa Maharaj de Ki Jai. Shri 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 Santa Baba Ram Das a Ki Jai.